Serious, what is something scary that has happened to you that you cannot explain rationally? I live in a condominium and we own 2 apartments on the 7th and 8th floor. The only way to move in between them is to step out of the apartment, take the elevator or the staircase and enter the other one. One night, we ran out of ice cream upstairs and my mom told me to go get some from the downstairs freezer, so I took the keys to the 7th floor's apartment and since it was dinner time, no one was there. I walked into the pitch dark and realized that someone was sitting on the sofa, so I flipped the switch to see my dad just sitting there. It was kinda weird, but I just went to get the ice cream and asked if he had a key to lock up. No answer. I shrugged and thought, well, if he came in and locked the door behind him, he must have one. Went back upstairs and my dad was sitting there eating dinner. I freaked out and asked how the heck did he get up here so fast. Everyone told me that he's been here all this time. I told them it wasn't possible cause I just saw him downstairs, but no one believed me. Now I never go down there alone. I used to work doing maintenance at historic properties. There was a historic house museum I worked at when it wasn't open to the public. It was part of a whole landmark site. There was a visitor center with offices and then the house was about half a mile up a dirt road in a wooded area. Sometimes I worked with a crew, but there were a lot of times I was there alone. One winter day, when it was really cloudy and dark, I was working alone to get ready to replace some electric work on the exterior of the house. I went inside and turned off the circuit to the whole property, and I tested it. It was off. I locked the doors and went outside to work. After about an hour, I got down from my ladder and started walking around the house and then one of the lights inside the house turned on. I started to freak out, but thought that maybe someone was playing a joke on me. I called the visitors center on my walkie-talkie, and confirmed that the only other person who was working that day was still there and hadn't left. All the keys to the house were present and accounted for. That's when I freaked out and ran the half-mile up to the office. I made my coworker come back with me to check out what was going on, but when we got to the house, the light was off again, but the bulb was still warm. All the doors were still locked and the circuit was still off. Still gives me shivers to this day. When I was in uni, I lived by myself. It was a nice little studio unit behind a house in a fairly decent area. I would honestly think nothing of walking places at night. There was a 24-hour McDonald's and a 7-Eleven that I would walk to, often between 12 a.m. to 3 a.m. since I was a massive night owl. Well, one day after finishing an essay at about 2 in the morning, I decided I was hungry but didn't really have anything easy to cook, so I decided to walk down to the 7-Eleven and grab a pie or something. However, as soon as I opened my door, I was overcome by a suffocating feeling of fear. My heart started pounding, I started shaking, the works. Telling myself that this was ridiculous, I walked out to the street with the intent to still go, but that was as far as I got. I was terrified for no reason that I could understand, but no less intensely despite that. I ran back inside and ate dry cereal. Later the next day, I heard about a group of drunk guys that were causing havoc down near the intersection at the 7-Eleven. They'd beaten up someone from my uni. Even though I can't explain it, I'm convinced something bad would have happened to me that night if I had ignored that feeling and gone anyway. Hunter/mountaineer here. It was a chilly December morning. I hiked in, pre-dawn, taking about an hour and a half to go 3 miles off the beaten trails. Got to my nest about half an hour before sunrise and started to settle in. The wind kicked up and a fog rolled, and that was thicker than milk. Within a few minutes, my visibility was 5 foot. I'm sitting tight, huddled up against the freezing wind when I start to hear twigs snapping close to me. For no apparent reason, what is normally a rapturous sound indicative of an imminently successful hunt, sent a frosty chill down my spine. I chambered around in my lever action 30-30 as quietly as I could, and lay flat on my back tucked against a fallen tree. The rustling was moving closer through the fog, but I couldn't see anything. The sun was starting to peek over the mountains to my east and visibility was starting to increase. The rustling of twigs and leaves was sporadic, sometimes directly in front of me, sometimes behind or beside me. I remember laying there, rifle across my chest, thinking to myself how silly it was to react like such a coward. I rationed with myself that bears and mountain lions are a rarity where I was, and I had likely stumbled into a herd of whitetail that had bedded down. I decided to sit up. The rustling stopped immediately. As it was fully dawn by now, I was looking through the fog for the outline of my prey, which I had assured myself was literally all around me. It wasn't. Seemingly, nothing was. By now, the fog had faded away and it was apparent to me that I was alone in those woods. I hunted all that day without seeing so much as a squirrel. Around 3 in the afternoon, after fighting the wind and an abnormally cold day, and not wanting to hike out by flashlight, I decided it was time to start back to the truck. Walking out of those woods was the most uneasy I have ever felt. Lawfully, once you make it back to the trail, you're supposed to clear the chamber of your rifle. Not that day. What is normally a stroll through the woods, I undertook with the seriousness of an animal being stalked. I would walk, then stop and listen. I never heard or saw anything during my retreat, but I could feel eyes on me. I was about 100 feet away from my truck, when I rounded the last corner and saw, hanging at eye level from a tree by a noose, a stuffed bear in a blaze orange jacket. I'm a giant, broad-shouldered outdoorsman, but that one shook me something fierce.
When I was younger, my mom was dating this guy, who we will call JB, and after a few months he invited my mom, me, and my brother to go with him and his son, about my age, out to his lake house for the weekend. It was right on Lake Michigan but up in a more secluded area, which was pretty awesome. Well, we got up there and for one I already felt really creeped out. It was a smaller 2, maybe 3 if you count the really big attic, story house that had the living room / dining room / kitchen on the first floor and had 2 bedrooms on the second floor. His grandfather had helped to build the place with the grandfather's dad, and then he lived there for most of his life working as a tailor in the nearby town. We went up to the attic to get some beach toys because that's where JB kept all of that stuff so he didn't have to haul it every time he went out there. Well, when we went up to the attic I noticed in the corner covered in some dust and cobwebs about 8 mannequins, some just upper torsos and some full body. Not too out of the ordinary considering a tailor had lived there. Me and JB's son slept down in the living room on the couch since there were no more beds, and near midnightish I heard on of the stairs squeak a few times. Figuring it was my mom coming to check to make sure we were asleep, I told his son to be quiet and quickly turned the TV off and hid under the covers. After not hearing any noise for a few minutes I looked out from under the covers and saw 3 of the mannequins moving around in the kitchen. Like their body parts weren't moving but they were sliding around the kitchen. I swore I was dreaming but was so terribly frightened I hid back under the covers with a small yelp and then heard the dragging on the floor coming closer and peeked out, seeing one of them just a few feet from the couch. I hid back under the covers and shut my eyes tight hoping it would go away. The next morning I got up and tried not to think about it, really hoping it was just a bad dream, but when we went back up to the attic to put the beach stuff back the mannequins were in different spots and weren't covered in cobwebs anymore. Don't believe me if you don't want to, but it happened and I've been scared shitless of mannequins ever since. In my childhood home I would often hear touch typing coming from the computer downstairs early in the mornings. I didn't think much of it at first. My parents worked from home and it wouldn't be uncommon to wake up in the morning to hear Mom typing away at the computer. One day I got up and called out to Mom assuming she was down there working as I could hear typing. No answer. No one was down there at all. I was sure I heard typing. This began happening regularly. I figured I was so used to hearing typing from downstairs that I was hearing things that weren't there, so I didn't mention anything to anyone, figuring I was going a bit crazy. This happened on and off over a period of 6 months. The sound of fast typing and fast, furious clicking of a mouse as if someone was frustrated. One morning I was eating my breakfast when I heard Mum at the top of the stairs call out to me, "You're not down there on that computer already?" I froze and ran out to her. I was amazed she had heard it too. She was convinced she could hear typing, yet no one was down there. I told her about all the times I'd been hearing it, and then my sister opened up about hearing it regularly too when no one was down there. I wasn't crazy after all. I set out to try catch whatever was causing it and to try discover a rational explanation for it. I'd sprint out of my bedroom, to the top of the stairs where I was able to look down into the room to see if anyone was at the computer. No such luck. Every time I got there it stopped. I think it went on for a couple of years and we learned just to kind of live with it as it wasn't every day. I was down there once when the ceiling light globe in the center of the room began flashing very fast, strobe-like. It then exploded and glass went shattering all across the room. I was lucky I ran out of the room when it started happening because I was scared, the whole mysterious typing, you know. If I hadn't ran I would have been hit with bits of light bulb. Around that same time I was on the computer at home by myself when something happened that resulted in me never being alone in that room again. I felt and heard this really sharp intake of breath directly behind my right shoulder near my ear. I've never ran so fast in my life and was hesitant going in that room ever again. Prior to that, the whole typing thing had just been something weird and a bit spooky, not scary. Still makes my heart race when I think about it today. Have never really encountered anything like this before or since all those events. I don't particularly believe ghosts either, but I'm open to the possibilities of something in which scientists don't have a proper explanation for yet. So a few years back, probably 6 to 7 years, my family was living in our previous home. This was our second house we had in Ohio. The first house was about 2 streets over from our second house. Well, one night my mom woke me up and was acting really panicked. She grabbed my brother, who was probably 5 at the time, and told me to go outside. It was about 4 in the morning, and once we all got outside my dad tried to calm my mom down. He asked her what was wrong, and she had explained that she had a dream that we were all gonna die from carbon monoxide poisoning if we stayed in the house. Then my dad told her that all the detectors were working perfectly fine and we decided to go back inside. We didn't smell anything nor did the detectors go off, so we went to bed. The next day my mom was watching the morning news before we went to school. The first story for the day was that a local family was rushed out of their home because of a carbon monoxide leak in their home. Which could have been just coincidence, but then the news station showed the house. It was our old house that we just moved out of. When I was 6 years old, I had a cat named Buster. Buster was actually my stepdad's cat, but because I never had a cat before, I claimed him as my own. Suffice it to say, Buster didn't like being hugged and coddled all the time by a little child, so he hated me. He avoided me at all costs. He was also an outdoor cat, so he would often spend most days outside and then come in for the night. One night, Buster didn't come back in the house. We usually fed him at night, so I was worried. Our area was also well known for an abundance of coyotes. My parents were being a bit hush-hush about Buster's disappearance, but I didn't get the hint. That night, when I was drifting off to sleep, Buster jumped onto my bed. He lay down by my head and let me pet him until I fell asleep. Honestly, I was shocked because he had never done this before. The next morning, I triumphantly walked downstairs and related to my parents that Buster now loved me because he slept in my bed during the night. My parents looked at me inquisitively and sat me down at the breakfast table to let me know that while they were outside the night before, they had found Buster's body in the alley behind our house. They thought he had been harassed by a coyote. But, he was dead, so he couldn't have slept in my bed that night. To this day, I like to think that Buster just wanted to say goodbye and thank me for trying to love him in the only way a child knew how. When I was little, I would go over to my grandparents' house frequently with my sister and cousins. My grandparents have an attached mother-in-law apartment, so we always played in there while the grown-ups would talk in the main house. One day we were playing hot and cold with a little key we found in the apartment. While one person was hiding it, they accidentally dropped it and it fell under the door to the basement. I opened the door to get it, and when I did, there was a man standing at the bottom of the stairs that I didn't recognize. He had a bunch of stuff in his arms, like he had rummaged through my grandparents' basement. Keep in mind, my grandparents were hoarders. Their basement was full of stuff that they either forgot about or put in storage, some of it being relatively valuable. When he saw me, he yelled at me, "Go back upstairs, kid. Go." I was so freaked out, I bolted and immediately ran into the main house to tell my parents. My dad went into the basement to look, but couldn't find anyone. To this day they all tell me I imagined it, but my sister and cousins insist it's real too. About 5 years later, both of my grandparents passed away, so I was helping my dad clean out their basement. Turns out they were missing a ton of stuff. I haven't gone back in that house since.